So we just spent quite a bit of time talking about stories and how they impact our understanding of ourselves and what is possible for us as individuals and groups. And something all of you are going to be able to do after tonight is to add one new scene to your story. It's a scene where a long-bearded wizard in a dark cloak approaches you in a pub and gives you a mission, a quest. And this is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you a quest that you can go on, and I'm going to help you to find where you fit in the battles that are coming. And I'm going to use as an example a society organized for war from the past. Now, it was a very different war that they were fighting, but I want to talk to you about the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula. What happens when you're outnumbered? On the Portuguese side, they had about 300 professional knights and a bunch of peasants versus, depending on the time, between 27,000 and 34 or 35,000 Muslim troops in the south of Portugal. This is beyond outnumbered. Their enemies were richer than them. They belonged to a global caliphate that could pull money, resources, and men from anywhere in the world and use it against them. They were against a global empire. They had this international backing allowed them to instantly replenish any resource that the Portuguese were able to sap from them. They controlled all the trade in the ocean around the Portuguese kingdoms. They controlled all the trade on the land around the Portuguese kingdoms. They controlled everything. And here's the biggest problem. Some of their so-called allies were also their enemies. This is something we need to understand, that in politics there's no such thing as an ally. There is a friend of convenience. So you see America saying when someone is their ally, that's just a friend of convenience. And if you speak to anyone at the highest levels, they understand that. It's why they try to keep each other convenient. They try to sweeten the deal to manage to keep these allies. How are you going to win a fight like this? You see that little tiny bit at 718 in the top? That's all they had. This little blip. And they had to capture all of that. This is the size of the empire they were facing. It's all that green. And this isn't just a large empire. This is a rich empire. This is an empire based on war and conquest. Their enemies were no slouches at battle either. They were fierce warriors. So they needed to create a society organized for war. This is a society where they incorporated every single member into the militia. Women, children, everything. But they all had their own unique roles. Every facet of society was connected with their goal. That is the reconquest of their homelands. Your personal reputation and your identity didn't have anything to do with who you were born to. And very quickly in the beginning of the reconquest, aside from the original knights that came there, it was more of a performance thing. If you could fight, you rose up the ranks. If you spent money on yourself, people would look down on you, unless it was armor. You bought armor and weapons, that was good. People's priorities were dictated by the communal goal of retaking their lands. Your family life was organized around war. Why did you get married? It was a duty for men to marry and have children. Why? Because we needed warriors for the next generation. And we needed women to produce more warriors for the next generation. That's why you had daughters. Trade and industry was organized for war. On the frontier, you had flexible trades. A lot of cattle herding and things like that could be moved out of the way. If you were a blacksmith, you weren't just a blacksmith. You didn't just make horseshoes. You made weapons too. Whatever you did, you figured out how it could contribute to the effort of your tribe, of your community. The municipal governments were organized principally to hold territory. So we saw that very small area they had at the beginning, and the first thing they did is start to reinforce the municipal governments. We don't have the best records at the time, but what we understand is that every male person living in those towns, so you were a citizen of the town you lived in, not necessarily the nation at the time, had an obligation conforming to his level of wealth to be armed and trained in the use of those arms so as to reinforce the border and hold their territory against the enemy. Their spiritual life was organized for war. When they go to church, they would be absolved of any crimes they committed in the conduct of war. Their minister would help them to understand. Their priest was Catholic, so their priest would help them to understand that it was their duty and obligation to defend their people and to take back the land that was rightfully theirs. Their military was organized for this as well. The professional soldiers, the knights, these were the Frankish knights that I had mentioned before, they were like a special forces unit. So your municipal government would hold land, but if you were going to break through, you'd call in the knights. You get attacked, you'd hold it for 2 or 3 days, the knights would come in to reinforce and break the siege. This was highly effective because everyone was in the battle. Now, if you remember from my earlier presentation, I said, we're in a 5th generation war, and none of us are civilians. We're either victims or combatants. They understood this very well. This is, I think, 2nd generation warfare? Yes. This was hitting each other with pointy things, as Kurt says. So what are the successful factors to this type of a culture? They had a long-term vision. It took 700 years and 35 generations for the Portuguese and Spanish to drive the Muslims out of the Iberian Peninsula. Can you imagine being part of something that you know isn't going to be finished in your generation, not in your kids? It's going to take 35 generations to finish. Now, I don't personally believe it will take that long to fix the West. But if we have the attitude that we're willing to invest the next 1,000 years in it, then we'll win. They had incentives. I call it eat your enemy. This is how it would go. You were a young guy, probably 14, 15, 16, and you'd get a stick and you'd go to some guys about to go out and make a raid on Muslim territory, and you'd say, can I tag along? I'll carry some stuff. I'll dig privies. I'll whatever you want. And I got a stick. I can, hit some guys too. And you go out with them, and they do most of the fighting, and you might get to pick through some scraps at the end. And you get a little bit of treasure, and you do some work. Then you come back. This time you're going to buy yourself a spear and a helmet. And you're going to go to these guys and say, okay, this time I don't want to be one of the retainers following. I want to actually get in the fight. And you get in the fight. Now you come back and you buy a chainmail and a shield. And as soon as you've got a full set of armor, you start spending money to get your brother armed. So now your brother's with you too. You get your other brother armed. Okay, you've armed all your brothers, now you get your cousins armed. Only by now you can afford a horse and a lance, and you've got a proper set of armor. And it doesn't take very long, and you are de facto a knight. And you have risen from a filthy peasant to a nobleman through your own courage and your own actions by eating the enemy. This is all off wealth you took from the enemy. This allowed them to have incremental winning. They didn't need to win fast. They knew they were going to win. They could win slowly. The enemy couldn't take any territory. They were so well reinforced. And they knew, this year's not a good year to fight. Weather's bad. We'll reinforce. We'll have a few more kids. We'll fight next year. They fought on their terms when they wanted to, in the way that best suited them, because they had their back covered. They had their frontier reinforced. And they kept reinforcing those wins. So if they did capture a town, and they didn't go deep into enemy territory, they went just into enemy territory, capture a town, and immediately would be flooded by volunteers from all of the surrounding municipalities, because if you got there, you got a free house. So you get there, you get a free house, and maybe you get some vineyards or fields around it. You may not be able to cultivate them yet, but if you can hold it for a few years, it'll stop being frontier land, and will pass on ahead. and it'll be safe, and now you can start cultivating it. But you earned what you took by being first, by taking the initiative. And everything that you got, you reinvested into the winnings. The Portuguese nobility was notable in Europe for not getting involved in any finery. They didn't like fancy clothes, fancy palaces. They often slept in tents and on dirt floors while they were engaged in these missions for months and years at a time. And they put all their money back into the fight. Now, this was their aristocracy setting the lead, setting the example. Dom Afonso Henriques, the first king of Portugal, who you'll see later, there's almost no images of him. I think the one I show here is one of the only ones of him wearing wearing noble type of clothing. Normally he was always pictured wearing armor, with his sword drawn and holding his shield. This was how he chose to be represented as engaged in the fight. Why? Because this encouraged the culture of war. They also fought on every front. If there was anything they could do to undermine the enemy and take their territory, they did it. That could be small raids. That could be stopping their caravans, their trade. That could be advancing and taking a town just to raise it and then come back again. And sometimes that just meant holding your ground in the face of the enemy. There was these three combined tactics that were essential in the reconquest. First of all, it was the milita. Every man on the frontier was a soldier. Can you imagine living in a town with 50,000 other men and every single man there is a warrior? Doesn't matter what else they do. They might do a little blacksmithing. They might do some cattle herding, but they're a warrior first. Those other things are just because somebody needs to eat and your sword needs to be sharpened. That's it. Their principal duty was to fight. They created these artificially composed communities to work the recaptured land. So I said, be people coming from different municipalities all of a sudden at once to fill in a new town. They didn't have the advantage that most towns in Europe had where everyone was related. Very often you ended up with a town where nobody hardly knew each other. But because they were united in a single goal and a single objective, they were able to cooperate. That built trust. They fought together to hold that piece of land. Trust was built. And to this day, many of those towns are still populated by the descendants of the people that took them. Sometimes 1,000 years after they took them. They also had an aristocracy. And this aristocracy was largely raised up, partly by the king. Of course, he had to choose who entered the aristocracy. He has to sign off on them. They actually enter into a book. And they still do this today. They're actually having a problem because we don't have a king in Portugal. And the aristocracy would like to elevate some members from the lower into the upper aristocracy. And we can't legally do it unless there's a king. And you can't have a king because that's illegal right now. So they're stuck. But the aristocracy, their full-time job was fighting. And we think of the aristocracy now as being leader or rulership, or just a bunch of fat, rich, bratty kids that do nothing and consume taxpayer dollars. But back then, they were the tip of the spear. They were the special forces of the time. And they kept the pressure on the enemy. This allowed ordinary people to focus on things like having kids and the other things that were necessary to have a 35-generation-long war. This is Dom Afonso Henriques, the first king of Portugal. And he is here in his dress armor. He was 15 years old, and he was already well over 6 feet tall, and very few men in his father's army could spar with him. And his father actually got injured around this time. He ended up taking over the management of his father's military forces. He was so strong with his sword that it weighed 5 kilos. Does anyone here know much about fencing and how much your average European sword weighed? It's extremely rare to have a sword over 2 kilos. So a kilo is about 2.2 pounds. That's a heavy sword.
And he's wielding it one-handed?
Yes, one hand with the sword and a shield in the other. Because while he has plate on here, That probably was painted afterwards because they would have been mostly at this time ringmail.
Plate armor like that would have weighed 70 pounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I bet he could jump on the horse in the plate armor.
Yes. His big problem was finding horses big enough for him. Actually, that was actually a problem he had. He took half of the country in his lifetime. Now, mind you, he started young, 15 years commanding the army, and he lived quite long. But he did this with very few knights. He only had at maximum 300 men in his retinue. And he did this by making deals with the British and other groups to give him, to temporarily lend him soldiers from time to time. But it was mostly this culture of war that he relied on, because his people had his back. And here's the thing, when the people fight with the king, they become united. Because remember, he's a Frank, and the Portuguese are not. It's a different people. Why fight for this invader instead of the other invader? Because this invader fought with them to retake their lands, to give them back their religious freedom. And we talked about the Franks earlier. The Franks had much more open freedom of speech where they lived, which was not something that happened in the Muslim lands. They were fighting to live under, they preferred this king over their other king. And so they supported him. Some of the prominent battles was the Battle of Ourique. It's a pivotal moment in the reconquest of Portugal. There were between 2,000 or 3,000 troops with Dom Afonso Henriques, the previous king I showed you, and 10,000 Moorish troops. These are not slouches. These are not nothing. These are good troops as well. The superior armor and the big, well-trained horses of the Latin knights carried the day. Their tactics carried the day. Their organization, their cooperation, the way they fought together. What made this possible? Made it possible is the kind of men they were raising. The kind of men their culture cultivated. This is Oraldo the Fearless holding up the head. It's a severed head in his hands, if you notice, of the governor of one of the cities in Portugal that he captured. So these men, they acted as a front force, so they were like special forces. They would, if you notice, he doesn't have a sword, he has a knife. They would go in lightly armed, even lightly dressed just to be fast and mobile. They often didn't have much in the way of armor. And they would go into cities that were held by the enemy, and they would make strategic attacks, destroy infrastructure, block gates open, kill key commanders, and escape. It got to the point where these guys were so effective that the enemy didn't want to live in the territories where they were, and they couldn't get anyone competent to command the armies. They had desertions, over 30 or 40 guys causing trouble in the night. Asymmetrical warfare. This created a nation of men of extraordinary vigor and energy. And these men took over almost the entire world afterwards. This is a country that didn't have a population over 2 million at any point during this entire story. Look at all the places they took over. To read the stories of what they did, they basically went in and pointed their guns at people and said, well, we're going to take you over, and their enemy laughed because there's so few of you. And I said, well, then fight. Here's the thing. I read recently, it's basically the whole point going from when they hit the top of Africa, they're over, that section of their adventures. The biggest thing that held them back was their noble class wanted to fight the enemy hand to hand instead of hitting them at long range with their superior canonry. And so they would get into these impossible to win fights, and they were perfectly happy to die because that was more fun for them than sitting there and, well, some guy shot at some other guy in a boat. This created a type of intrepid and brave man that we haven't seen the likes of on this planet for decades, maybe a couple of centuries. What's the modern version of this? Our personal reputation and responsibility. How do you elevate yourselves nowadays? People will drive a Ferrari. I don't mind Kurt's Ferrari, that's not a problem. He doesn't drive it because it's cool, he drives it because he likes it. It's a little different. But people today will spend conspicuously conspicuous consumption, conspicuous sexual consumption as well. That's how they make themselves look big. But what is it that you give honor to? Who in our social circles gets their reputation or their identity grown or valued by doing what? Depends on our mission. How is our family life organized? Are we raising sons to be warriors? Daughters to be the mothers of warriors? Is that how we're raising our families? We have to look at our trade and industry. Are we set up so that our money comes from sources, if possible, that aren't cancelable? We're making ourselves as robust economically as possible. Are we doing work with each other before we go out and do it with strangers? Municipal governments. Well, this is something we don't have a ton of control over unless we live in a small enough city where we can start to run for office and get some power. But how about our spiritual life? Do we go to a rainbow flag church? Do we tolerate others undermining our spiritual values and who we are? Well, if we are, we're not going to be very organized to accomplish anything. Military, well, that's not something we have a lot of power over. I'm going to leave that for a moment. We have the same success factors as they had. If we want to be successful, we need that long-term vision. We need to say, we're setting this up for, if necessary, the next 1,000 years. If it takes that long to win, we win. I hope it doesn't. But if we're ready to make it win in 1,000 years, we'll win in 100 or 10. Have we set our incentives up right? Do we feel motivated, incentivized, and are we incentivizing others to go out and eat our enemy? Can we find ways to profit off of the situations that are happening right now? There's a gentleman online, James Santiago, and he talks about this all the time, about how one of the big battlefields in the current war is business. Can we create businesses that are more competitive, more agile, and more effective because they follow natural law and they're connected to reality and they don't turn off the kind of men that have joined here, the competent men that we have in the world? Are we doing that? Are we okay with incremental winning? If I told you, vote for this guy, he's going to solve all your problems. What does that sound like? That's not incremental winning. That's like gambling. I'm going to be all in on Trump. Doesn't mean I'm saying don't vote for him. That's not the point. If you think that's going to solve all your problems, you're not ready to win. You're not winning incrementally. You're not even winning, period. And are you going to reinforce your wins? We talked earlier about the cost of persistence. People think, I'm going to win this election, and then everything's going to be better. I'm going to run for office in my local town, and then I'm going to get that office. Are you going to keep it? Because I guarantee you the other side's going to be spending the whole time between when you're elected and the next election figuring out how to get you out. So you might win something, you're ready to hold on to what you win. If you have a society organized for war, you are, because everybody you know is on the same team and they're all working together at the same goal. And if you miss something, they'll get it. And if they miss something, you're going to figure it out. Are you reinvesting into winning? Now, everybody that's here invested into winning. It costs money to get here. Some of us flew from the other side of the world. It costs money to get here, money to stay here. We're reinvesting in our winning. Can we get other people to do the same? Are we going to continue to do that? And are we going to fight on all fronts? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. What are the battle fronts that we have today? You know, they had multiple battle fronts. So do we. You have the family. That is homeschool. That's ensuring that your family has an identity that's more attractive to your children than the one that's being sold to them by the worlds that we live in. Your marriage needs to get stronger. Who here of men have gone through, I know a lot of you have, gone through some sort of cancellation event, gotten fired, and imagine what would happen if your wives didn't have your back. How that would have gone. Some of you had problems with that, and it was miserable for you. So we need to work on that, get our marriages stronger. Start building extended family. You know, we have kids and then we scatter them to the four corners of the earth to fight on their own. Why do we do that? Why don't we raise our kids and say to them, hey, let's all live close together so we can help each other out? So we can reinforce that area that we've already got and build from there. All we have to do is do that, and several generations later, we just spread out and own a town because they're all our descendants. There's more than one way to solve that problem. There's social warfare. So a lot of older men, they retire and immediately they die. Have you ever heard that guys die after they retire? Why? Because they retired and their purpose of life is gone. Their kids are old enough, they don't need them. Their grandkids probably do, but they need to go and spend the time on that. Except they scattered them to the four corners of the earth, so they don't know where their kids are living. They need to go out and mentor some young men. There is no shortage of young men that will benefit, or women if you're a lady, that will benefit from your mentorship. And you don't have to have everything in life perfect to mentor. There are 25-year-olds that can be mentoring a 15-year-old. There are 35-year-olds that can be mentoring a 25-year-old. And you only have to mentor people on things that you have mastered. You could be broke, in great shape. Go mentor people in getting into shape. Don't mentor them on finances. That's not your thing. But all of us can mentor somebody because we're ahead of somebody in some place. Social organizations. There are all kinds of social organizations across this nation that are run by older men who have created fantastic things and want the next generation to take over. Elks clubs, Rotary clubs, things like this. And nobody's taking over. And people just want to sit in their basement and do nothing. Can you go to those organizations and say, I want to be useful. I want to help you. I want to take on your connections, your network. In some cases, these guys are going to give you basically the keys to the local kingdom. Because you go and you show interest in what they're interested in. And many times these people have a legitimate desire to make their communities better. These are good people. Go join these. Don't start your own organization. That just makes you a target, as I very well know. Go and join a 150-year-old organization that has a team of lawyers. Let's see what they do to you. Nothing. They'll leave you alone. Also capturing youth support. The left has been excellent at this. The left goes into the schools and brainwashes kids, and nobody does anything about it. Why aren't we doing that? Only not brainwashing them. Why aren't we freeing them from the brainwashing? Why aren't we teaching them the truth, teaching them what's right? Is it because it's too expensive? No, I don't think we thought of it. That's the problem. And we tend to say, oh, I just want to be left alone. They're not going to leave you alone. They're not going to leave these kids alone. And many of these kids do not have parents that are as wise as we are and are going to give them what they need. Sometimes a single meeting with a wise adult will completely change a young person's life. Let that be us. Business. Are you uncancelable or closer to it? Are you closer to being uncancelable now than you were last year? You need to do it. Get closer and closer. Does your business rely on a bunch of lefty suppliers? Can you change your supply chain? Your digital supply chain in many cases if you have an online business. Can you fix that so you're not cancelable? Is your business local if possible? Are you dealing with people you know that you see face to face, where you're exchanging money for services right there or money for knowledge? Why is that important? Because that means that you're building a local network. This has always been a problem for me. I work mostly online. And I'm working right now, even it means I make less money per hour because I live in a very poor country. I'm still looking to make that local network. Why? Not so I can make more money, so I can make more network. Are you producing real value? If the proverbial shit hits the fan, if you're not producing real value, you're going to know it really quickly because all your money will dry up. But not if you're producing value. If you can, employ your own people. Why are you hiring people that hate you? Why do you work for people that hate you? Do neither of those things. Work for people who love you or yourself and employ people who love you. Then you're on the same path. They're not just coming to work because it's a job. They're coming to work because you share a mission with them. Religion. Does your religion adhere to natural law? This is a very touchy subject. This is probably in depth, something I'll only talk about privately with people. But if your religion doesn't adhere to natural law, it will get captured ideologically by the left. It'll get captured by people who want to use it as a tool to brainwash you. Is your religion producing mindfulness? Does your church make you more anxious when you leave? Or do you feel better after you come out of services? Do you feel rejuvenated? If you don't, it's not a good place. It's poisoning you. Now, religion also offers protected association. The United States offers a tremendous amount of protection to those who have their own religion. So if you have your own church, I talked to a man the other week, and he said to me, I'd like to start an association for young men, and I'd like to help them. But he says, I'm really afraid that just because I've been involved in some politics in the past, that they'll come after me. And I said, he says, how do I do this? And I said, well, everybody has a Bible, and when they join at your house, you say it's Bible study. You can talk about anything you want when you're there, but if anybody asks, it's Bible study, and they'll leave you alone because they can't do anything. They can't even listen into what you're saying. It's a private residence, and you're having a private religious discussion. Use that protection. The militia. So, of course, violence is never off the table unless you're disarmed, disorganized, and incompetent. So make sure you're none of those things. My neighbors are talking a lot about what happened in Israel a couple of weeks ago. And they're saying that the same thing could happen in any European town and in many U.S. towns tomorrow. And no one's prepared for it. You guys are a little more prepared than we are. We'll basically run around and scream until we die. You guys can at least shoot back. We're not prepared for that. And that's kind of funny because we spent it in 700 years preventing this from happening in the first place. And in the last 7 years, we let it reset. So, it looks like we'll have to fix that problem again. Politics. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in some of the future slides. But here's the thing. I'm not saying go win elections. I'm saying build teams that can win elections. That's a big difference. That means if you don't win, you don't feel like you failed. It's the team building that's important. The mission's just, if we can, let's win. If we can't, we'll win next time. You remember, we got time to win if we keep making incremental progress. And sometimes just making the opponent uncomfortable is a win by itself. Lawfare. This is something we've talked a lot about in this weekend. Lawfare right now offers us an opportunity, and I want to talk about what they did with the Second Amendment landscape. Right to carry, 1986. Look at that map. Almost the entire United States had no right to carry. In fact, they wouldn't issue a license to carry a concealed weapon. It's a few years ago. Why does the map look like this now? By 2019, just a few years later, the entire U.S. had, at minimum, may issue, and that's going to end with Supreme Court decisions, going to shall issue, and then the green is constitutional carry. Why? A small group of highly dedicated lawfare experts attacked the laws that were preventing this from happening using the Second Amendment. They were persistent, they were consistent, they raised funds, which by the way, we need to do that too. They raised the money to do it, and they kept the pressure on the enemy, and they kept winning, and they fought where they could win. And they expanded from there. And look at the difference in the map. What's the issue you care about, and how do you want to change the map? We have the option to use, does anyone know what the RICO Act is? Yeah. Racketeering. Yeah, that's right. So racketeering is basically highly organized criminal activity, especially in extortion. This was created to stop the Italian mafia. But I want to ask you something. What's the difference between some guy coming to you and saying, that's a nice store, it'd be too bad if somebody burnt it down, or saying, well, that's a nice store, too bad if someone canceled all your banking connections and prevented you from advertising in social media? What's the difference? I don't believe the court will see a difference. I think it's going to be seen as exactly the same thing. In fact, it may be even more pernicious because of the scale that it was done at. I don't think there's any mafia member in the United States that made as much money off extortion as the ADL has. Not even close. We have not seen a racketeering ring as big as the ones we see right now in American history. RICO Act, that's the tool we use. But we need some money for this, of course. We need to invest into it, our time and our money. We also need to create a new aristocracy. I mentioned that that was a key component. What does aristocracy mean? Does anyone know?
So you take on responsibility.
Yes. It's the best of us. It means those who are willing to take on the highest levels of responsibility. That doesn't mean you're essentially a noble that rules people. You could be the lawyer who says, I'm not giving up. I'm going to dedicate myself full time to this. There were several of them with the Second Amendment stuff. Their entire career has been fighting since the 80s. They're almost done now. I think we're going to see in our lifetime an end to the NFA Acts, complete end, probably the abolition of the ATF since it's only authorized through the NFA Acts. It's very likely. Very few people fought for that. They fought hard and they were well coordinated and well organized and backed by a lot of people who cared about those issues. We need to raise up our own virtuous elites. There has never been in history an example of average people conquering local elites. Never works. What happens is you find a more virtuous elite to back, or you create a more virtuous elite from within your own people, and they overthrow the current elites. And that works at the political level as well as martial. It doesn't matter what scale you're working at. We need to find such men and women and support them, but also hold them to a high standard. They need to represent us. They need to be held to our standards, our high standards. We also need, this is especially true in Europe, so we're in the US, but I'm going to present, this one slide has to do with a problem I personally face living in Europe. We need to restore the European militas. This is a picture of, I think, Swiss or German. No, Landschnecker is German. These are German milita men that were common for a few hundred years during the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages. It was normal for Europeans to have the right to bear arms if they were free men. Our current state is an abnormality. It's a sickness that's been imposed upon us. Our governments right now, our militaries in Europe are using outdated equipment. Their bureaucracy is terrible. The soldiers are unmotivated. Several countries in Europe only have a small percentage of people that would fight for the nation, according to latest statistics. Most people would be perfectly happy to see a foreign power overthrow their government. That's how fed up they are with it, which means we can't rely on the government as the only source of protection. European governments are broke. They're broken and they're corrupt to a level which you think it's bad here. Nothing happens in Europe without a bribe, especially in the southern half. Northern half, they do work on that a little better. They have no martial culture. You have an obesity epidemic here. We have a skinny boy epidemic in Europe. I live at the beach, so it's a little better. It's where all the cool people hang out, but that's why I live there. They let me in, it was nice. But I live there because that's where the fit people are. Because you have to go to the beach every year, so you don't want to be too out of shape. But there's about 2 or 3 fit women for every fit man. The guys are not keeping up. No martial culture. Martial culture. Mars. Mars is the god of war. He's also the god of masculinity. Martial culture, as martial culture exists in your country, so does masculinity. The two are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. If you want masculine culture, you must restore martial culture. It is the only way to turn weak men into strong men and to make them truly masculine. There must be a martial culture. We also have a lot of lazy attitudes in Europe towards violence and towards our own responsibilities towards the commons. And we now have a mixed population of low trust outsiders. We're in danger. We're in big trouble. What's the solution? This is what I propose. This is what I'll be proposing at other locations in Europe, is that we create non-profit militias. These are basically charities that are also fighting. It's only for natives of the particular country you're in. You have to be at least a third generation there if you're an officer. This ensures that your loyalty is to the country you're living in. Locally operated and funded and staffed. And they essentially, membership in that milita grants a right to bear arms. Since we have no Second Amendment in Europe, it's hilarious because I hear people all the time talking about how our Second Amendment protects our right to bear arms. And I say, we're in Portugal. We don't have a constitution with a Second Amendment. We don't even really have a constitution. European constitutions basically say, you have these rights unless we don't feel like giving them to you. Because of, a reason, which is at our discretion. They're not rights. They're temporarily privileges, as long as you're good. We need this to create this right to bear arms and the responsibility to bear arms and to show up for civil, not just civil disobedience or civil disorders, but for earthquakes and other natural disasters. I also suggest that men participating in this, because Europeans are poor, much poorer than Americans, that they end up with some sort of a yearly stipend or tax rebate that allows you to afford your equipment and your training. Okay, so this is we're back to what we can do here in the US or in Europe. We can do either of these things. This is me giving you your assignment. You can find out where you fit in there. And by the way, if you're a lady, you can say young lady, ascendant lady, mature lady instead. What can you do if you're a young man? I want you to pick one or more of these things and get started. So if you're a young man, pull out your notes, take a photo. However you want to get that in your mind, you need to be going out and finding mentors. You need to be building yourself a career, not a job. Don't be satisfied with a job. You need a career, and probably you need a career that has 2 or 3 skills stacked together. Get out and start a family. You guys have it real good right now. There's a lot of single women out there looking to start a family. And there isn't many guys around. And most of them are playing video games in their mom's basement. And they're mostly fat and socially inept. And literally all you have to do is go up and speak to them, to the ladies. That's it. You can say the stupidest thing in the world. Speaking to them puts you ahead of all those guys that didn't. Go start a family. If you're not sure how to do that, talk to me. Join a fraternity. Go out and find a local fraternity that's already existing. You may not perfectly like it. You may not like all the guys in it. As long as they're not undermining your mission in life, go join. Find a fraternity to join. Get their network. What do you think is going to be easier to get a job? A good job, or start a career? Or even to find a woman? A man who knows nobody, or a man who's part of a fraternity where the successful men in his town belong. By the way, these successful men, they have daughters and granddaughters that they're going to leave an inheritance to. So, and you got to put your work in. If you're young, you're going to be putting in. Don't think you're going to get it all back. You're going to get it back as you get older. But right now, it's putting in. You got to add to the commons. What have you contributed to the commons? You've just been eaten so far. You need to contribute something to the commons. Build yourself a reputation for it. How do people know you? Are you a joke? Are you a loser? You don't have to be. You can build yourself a reputation as a solid, upstanding man. Here's what happens when you have a reputation. Opportunities find you. It's so much easier. I've never looked for a job in my life. Jobs find me. I don't want to do stuff and people say, I'll pay you to do it. And I'm like, okay. I didn't want to be a coach. And people said, yeah, but I need your help and I'll pay you. And I said, okay. And I started to like it so much, it became my career. Because I had a reputation as being able to help people solve their problems. That I didn't make to make money. I made that reputation because I was putting in the work to help people in my community. Does anyone know what an ascendant man is? This means you're well on your way. I'm probably in the ascendant man category, I guess. You're a guy who could mentor some other men. Maybe you're married, maybe you're not. Maybe you've got a business that you're running and you could hire a few young guys to work for you. Not just as employees, but because working for you means they're going to have a little bit of access to your mentorship. They're going to improve as men as well. In fact, the best way for men to bond is to work together. Go lead one of these fraternities. Join them and lead them. Take them into the next generation. Let these older men know, I'm going to come over here and help you, and I'm going to take the leadership burden off of you. A lot of these fraternities that I mentioned, they have all the power in the small towns. Go offer to help. I didn't put that in here, but lead your family as well. Ash was supposed to be there. I think I deleted it by accident. And start stacking cash. Save up some money. Get prepared. If we're in a long-term war, your kids are going to need some of that cash, or you will at some point. Stack it up. And here's the thing, invest in other teams. You've created your team. Let's say your thing is business, and you got your business going, you have your employees, and your people are doing well. Go invest in another team. Invest in relationships with other teams, both in the same area you're in and transversal. So if you're in business, go and invest in a bunch of guys that are going to run in politics. Maybe you haven't got time to do it. Go and invest in some guys that do. Find someone that's standing up on behalf of the children in your community. Tell them you've got their back and kick them some bucks forward. Because they're not going to be able to do that forever if nobody supports them. Put your money where your mouth is. Invest in those other teams. If you're a mature man, you better be mentoring men. If you're not, I think that's a crime. You're going to die hoarding all your wisdom, not sharing any of it? No, get out there and mentor other men. You might mentor the ascendant man. You might not have patience to mentor the young man. Maybe you're mentoring some ascendant men. I have men in this category, Kurt and others, that mentor me. Go lead the fraternities again. By this time, you should be in charge of them. You should be the one pulling in the young men. You should be going out and soliciting them, getting, hey, come in, join our organization. We'll have your back. Help other teams to cooperate. Go out in your community and be the guy. Be the guy that people phone when they got a problem. I got a problem, I'm going to phone you, and I'm going to say, I need somebody to fix my house, and there's no contractors around. Everybody's booked up for a year. This is happening in some friends of mine in Pittsburgh. Can't get anyone to fix their house for a year. But they got to live there with his wife and kids. He's fixing it himself. But if you got a network, you phone one of those mature men that you know, and he says, yeah, I know a guy. We'll have somebody there. We'll get somebody there. It doesn't matter if you have to work on the weekends. But you're going to owe me something back. It's perfectly fine. It's reciprocity. We do favors for each other. We owe each other. Invest in the winning teams. So this is investing in teams. You might be putting a little bit in. By the time you're a mature man, your finances should be set. You should be investing in winning teams, and you should be starting to get involved in politics. In Greek and Roman times, it was expected that a retired free man of means would get involved in local politics, not for his own power or aggrandizement, but because his wisdom belonged in part to the commons. He was able to gain that wisdom by living in the commons, by being around other older men, and it was his job now to use that wisdom to lead his people. This doesn't mean run for office, by the way. You might decide to be a kingmaker instead. Find some guys that are running for office, mentor them, help them through the process. Use your network to make sure that they're getting a fair shake in the election. But you need to be involved in your community. You can't sit by and consume your retirement on vacations and hedonism while everything burns around you. That's how we lost Rome. Here's some of the fraternal organizations you can join. If I mention Freemasons, people are either, oh, they're so awesome, or oh, they're horrible. So, but they are one of the, hey, you join and take over. It does what you want now because it's your guys running it. Oddfellows, Knights of Columbus, Rotary Club. Some of these sound like I just made them up, but they're real. Okay, this is like the top 5 or 6 off of Wikipedia. There's like 100 different organizations. Why would you start something when you can just go and join one of these? And very quickly, since there's only usually a half dozen older men now running these in a large town, you and a few of your friends can be more than half the members. If you're getting involved in politics, this doesn't mean run for mayor. There's a whole bunch of places you can be. You can be in the local school boards. You can run for law enforcement, sheriff's office. If you're a lawyer, you can run for the prosecutor. You can run. Do you know the coroners are elected? I'm sure it'd be nice to have a coroner as your friend. I mean, just in case.
What are you applying?
Just in case, you know. Judiciary. The judiciary, in large part, at the local level, is elected. But also trial court judges are elected. Any of you know a trial court judge? Might come in handy one day if you worked on his campaign. Let's say at minimum you can't organize one yourself. That's okay. Go work on a campaign. Don't have to like the guy. As long as he's not your enemy, go work on his campaign. Get to know some people. Find out how these things work. Next election cycle, maybe you run your own people. Governance, city council, mayor, county board of supervisors. Look, we talk about bloated government all the time. That means there's plenty of places for you to get in. Infrastructure, planning and zoning commissions, public work commissions. This is not a spot. This is an entire army of people that, by the way, you get paid for this, doing almost nothing, or mostly obstructing the flow of commerce in your city. Finance, city comptroller, commissioner of revenue. Wouldn't it be nice to be the commissioner of revenue in a corrupt town? You know exactly who made money where, and you know how to completely detonate everybody who ran in the last election because you know where all the corruption is. All you got to do is shut up and get that place. Don't just run on competence. Don't make any promises. And you figure out what's going on there next election cycle. You get to decide if the guys that are currently in there are going to be in there or not. Or be in jail because you report it. So if you're having trouble finding your place, out of all these things, I gave you so many options. Pick a mission and get involved. And if you're having a hard time with it, talk to me. Because the biggest thing isn't picking what to do. The biggest thing is having the courage to do it. And I'll help you with that. Thanks.